In this lecture, we'll be looking at the accessory structures of the skin. That is, the nails, the hair, follicles, and the hairs associated with them, and the oil and sweat glands. So during embryonic development, thousands of small groups of epidermal cells, maybe even hundreds of thousands of small groups of epidermal cells, from the stratum basale push deep into the dermis. And as they're pushing down, they multiply and differentiate and specialize to form what are known as the accessory organs. And so this swarming of, if we have here this swarming of cells as they develop downward, is what creates all the structures that we see in the adult form as the accessory structures. So we'll start with the nails. The nails form the protective covering at the tip of the finger, and this is an image here of a finger cut, sliced right through the middle. This is bone here, bone and cartilage, and so we can see inside view all the structures that we associate with the nail. The cuticle, it has its name. It's the eponychium. The hyponychium is the skin that is directly underneath where the nail separates from the nail bed. The nail plate, that's the visible attached portion of the nail. So this is the nail plate here, and it begins forming deep at the nail bed. The nail bed is this layer of epithelial cells that are continuous with the skin and continuous or attached to the underside of the nail plate as well. And it contributes developing cells to the nail plate. And as the cells become more and more stuffed with keratin, then those cells die, but they adhere very tightly to the other cells that have died and have been already contributed to the nail plate itself. If we look at a fingernail from the top side, so here's the fingernail. Let's say this is your thumbnail, and so here's the nail margins. This area here, that little half moon, is called the lunula, and that is where, and it would extend there underneath, behind the cuticle, and under the skin as well. That's the area of the most rapid epithelial cell division and growth, and that's where most of the nail plate gets made, is at the lunula. But it is still being reinforced and supported, and new nail cells are being added to the nail plate all the way across the nail bed as the cells push forward. So it's the rapid division here, you can see where I'm drawing, at the lunula, that forces the nail to grow in this direction. So if you can think of it as, if we put this image so that my arrow was pointing upward, it would be just like how we perceive the growth of the skin, where here at this basal area, nails new cells are being added, and that forces the growth of the nail out toward the tip of the finger. So keratin is a white kind of translucent protein, and so that's why the tip of the fingernail, where it separates from the nail bed, is clear, is kind of a translucent white color. Where the nail is still attached to the nail bed, the dermal blood supply there gives that pinkish color. And because the cells here at the lunula, and if we could peel away the skin, we would see underneath the skin there as well, because those cells are very active. There's still lots of growing cells that are down underneath there. That thickens that region and makes the pink more white and creates that lunula. And it's because of all this activity that the dermal blood supply is obscured, and it gives the lunula the very, very pink a very, very light pink, whitish coloration. So hair is found is found kind of distributed across the skin, the entire body surface. The only place that we don't see hair are in the palms and the soles. That's the thick skin. At the lips, the nipples, and parts of the external genitalia. So those are the only hairless skin on the body. And we have multiple functions that we can associate with hair, but all of them relate back to kind of protection. First, it can act as insulation, and we see that in animals that have dense fur coats. Their hair is very insulating for them, and even for us, folks who don't have any hair on their heads, so bald men especially, tend to wear hats during the winter a lot more than folks who have lots of hair, just because of how much heat can be lost across the scalp and how good hair can be at insulating the scalp area. It also blocks materials from getting into the nose, so all those hairs in our nose, the guard hairs there, have a real value. We block it from the eyes with the eyelashes and from the brows. So if you really sort of squinch up your eyes, your brows come lowering down over the eye and can be a real good block for dust and dirt and stuff. And then inside the ears as well, we have hairs that help to prevent things from getting into the ear when they shouldn't. And then last of all, it kind of, because it's smooth and slick, if something were to fall on your head, if you were to bump your head against something, it helps to kind of let your heads, the skin, slide past whatever is falling on your head or you're scraping up against, rather than being able to dig in there and hit the skin and damage the skin. So lots of protective functions that we associate with hair. So what are the structures of the hair follicle itself? So up here, let's see if we see. We're back up at the skin surface now. So I'm just trying to. There we are. And then we're up to the skin surface, and the hair itself would extend out beyond the skin surface. So here's the surface of the skin. There we go. Okay, so that's, if we could see the whole follicle, that would be a little bit helpful in this particular picture. So the follicle is like this tube-shaped depression into the dermis that is lined with epithelial cells. So these are all epithelial cells here. And just because of the way the slice happened, we don't see that thick epithelial layer all the way around, but it is there all the way around the hair itself. So lots of epithelial cells. And then inside the follicle, there's this area here called the hair bulb, and it's this region. That is the region of greatest cell division. So here we have lots and lots of rapidly dividing epithelial cells that will grow and divide, sending the hair growing toward the skin surface. So we've got the hair headed up toward the skin surface. This area here is, well, actually it's probably up to about halfway to the skin surface. It's considered the hair root. That's the still growing portion of the hair. The hair root is the living portion. Oops, and I skipped right over the hair papilla. The hair papilla, down here at the bottom, there's like a little bump of connective tissue that has a little big old knot of blood vessels coming in, and also a nerve, a nerve ending right in there. So this is the area that provides all the nutrients to the growing epidermal cells. The hair shaft is the portion of the hair that projects above the skin surface. So up here would be the hair shaft. So that's the anatomy then of a hair follicle. So how do they do their work? Dadgummit, I meant to have this picture on the next slide. So if you can imagine this picture down here. So here's the follicle. Here are all of the epithelial cells. Down here is that dermal papilla that is nourishing it. So down here at the base, these cells are rapidly dividing, and they're pushing up. So the division, just like with our skin, is that this is the zone of cell division down here, and as more cells are produced down here, then all of these cells are pushed higher and higher and higher. And there are multiple cells, of course, across the hair itself. So all of these cells are growing, they're elongating, and they're picking up melanin from the melanocytes that are associated there at the hair bulb. And the cells become filled with keratin, and as they fill up with keratin, just like we saw in the simple squamous epithelia of the skin, the stratified squamous epithelia of the skin, we see those cells becoming flattened, scale-like, as they fill up with keratin and then die because they're getting too far away from their nutrient supply down here. And so the hair will push up out through the skin, but those cells that are coming up through the skin, those cells are already dead now. So hair is a dead structure. The hair that we see at the surface of the skin is all dead. And a hair follicle will produce a single strand of hair for somewhere between 2 and 6 years before it needs to take a break. And then it will take a break, rest for several months. And then as the hair follicle becomes active again, that time that it was resting creates a weakness right here at the base. And as the new hair, as the hair follicle resumes activity, and that weakened area gets further and further up in the hair follicle, then eventually the hair will break off and it will fall away from the body. So hair can grow, depending on the person, it grows about 1/2 inch a month, and it will can grow for years without taking a rest. People who, I know my grandmother had super long hair. It was well down past her buttocks, and so my guess is that she just happened to have extra long lived hair follicles, so that the hair follicles grew for a very long time before they took their rest, and that allowed her to grow individual strands of hair that were several feet long. So on average, we lose between 20 and 100 hairs a day, and we've got about 100,000 hairs on our head, and about, if we look at a man's beard, there's about 30,000 hairs in that beard. Down at the base of the hair follicle, again in the dermal, in that dermal tissue, there is a very sensitive nerve ending. And as the hair is bent up at the surface of the skin, it wiggles the hair all the way down into the follicle. And that allows us to feel, that nerve ending allows us to notice that movement. And so our skin is, the sensitivity of our skin is increased by the little short hairs that are all around our body. Pattern baldness, which is a condition that can affect both men and women. We used to call this male pattern baldness, but we recognize now that women can get pattern baldness as well. The official term for that is androgenic alopecia. So alopecia is the limited hair growth. It's a genetically determined condition and can affect both men and women. And then, last of all, associated with the hair follicle is the erector pili muscle. This is a bundle of smooth muscle that, as it contracts, will pull the follicle and the hair upright. And it will also cause the skin at the surface around that hair follicle to bunch up, producing the goosebump that we associate with chills. So hair color is the result of a couple of different factors. Melanocytes in the hair bulb produce and transfer melanin to the hair cells, just like we saw with the skin. And there are two types of melanin that they produce. There's eumelanin, U meaning true. So eumelanin, that's the black and brownish pigmented or pigments of melanin. And then pheomelanin. Pheomelanin is a red or blondish colored pigment. And so different hair colors are the results of different ratios of these two melanin types. So our hair cells, or the bulb cells, can produce both pheomelanin and eumelanin. And so folks with really, really dark black hair produce almost entirely eumelanin. Folks with blonde, very light blonde, and red hair produce almost entirely pheomelanin. And then folks with intermediate colors are producing a blend of eumelanin and pheomelanin in their hair cells. So as we age, though, melanocyte activity decreases, and so when people get gray hair, that is because they are producing a little melanin, but not very much, and so the blend of that with the whitish colored keratin of the cells produces a gray color. And then as we get very old, the melanin production decreases and stops entirely, producing what we see as white hair, that really, really light white hair that older men and women might have. And that is hair that has no melanin in it whatsoever. So hair color, if it's not enhanced by Lady Clairol, is about the amount of melanin that's being produced and the type, the relative proportion of the types of melanin that are being produced. Okay, so next we'll talk about the sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are found everywhere on the skin except for the palms and the soles. They are generally associated with hair follicles, and the secretory cells here release their oils by a process that, if you remember back when we talked in Chapter 5, that is known as holocrine secretion. And so the cell that is going to do this, that produces the oils, will store the oil up inside of inside the cell, and then when it's time to release the oils, the cell will rupture, and all of the oils just come flooding out of the cell, along with all the debris, the cellular debris from the destroyed cell. And that material that is released is called sebum. Sebum is that combination of skin oil and cellular debris from those ruptured cells. And it helps to lubricate the skin and the hair, maintaining the soft, sort of silky feeling that we associate with nice, well lubricated skin and hair. This rupture of the cells is enhanced by the contractions of the erector pili muscle. So when the erector pili muscle pulls, that'll kind of twist and deform the cells, causing them to rupture and releasing their secretions. There are conditions where the sebaceous glands can become clogged. So when with a big surge of sex hormones that comes at puberty, the sebaceous glands go into overdrive, producing large amounts of oil, and this oil and cellular debris, that sebum, can clog up the duct of the sebaceous gland, or even the follicle itself, and it produces, when it gets clogged, then bacteria can invade, and it results in the condition that's known as acne vulgaris. And so here we can see the face of a young, I'm not sure if we got a guy or a gal here, probably a gal, since I don't see any beard starting to grow here. So the face of a person who's got pretty severe acne, and these ducts and follicles become clogged and infected. Okay, so those are the sebaceous glands. Now let's talk about the sudoriferous glands, also known as the sweat glands. Sudoriferous glands, we have a huge number of them, approximately 2.5 million. distributed all across the skin. The only place that we don't have sudoriferous glands are the lips, the nipples, and the external genitalia. They are a simple gland. That means that there is only one tube and a single secretory region, but they coil up. So, in cross section, it might look like this, coming up to the skin surface. And there are, and this is eep, arriving from deep, not eep, in the dermis, or sometimes even down in the superficial subcutaneous layer. Some of these sweat glands may have their origins way down in there. And then we have two types of sweat glands in the body. There are the eccrine sweat glands and the apocrine sweat glands, and we'll look at each of those separately in just a minute. So first, so here we are talking about the eccrine sweat glands. So we're looking now up at close up at a fingerprint, and you can see all of the sweat glands, their pores there at the surface of the skin, right at this fingerprint. Eccrine sweat glands are the most numerous of the sweat glands, and we find them especially abundant on the forehead, the neck, the back, the palms, and the soles. So these sweat glands are the ones that when we're working outside on a hot day, they are going crazy, producing sweat, trying to help us keep cool. And the duct opens directly to the skin at a little pore, and you can see each of the pores there in the middle of this fingerprint. These kinds of cells are merocrine glands. So rather than like the holocrine glands of the sebaceous glands, they don't burst and release the secretion. Instead, they do exocytosis to put out toward the skin surface this clear, watery solution. It's hypotonic, meaning it is more water and less salt than body fluids. And it also includes small amounts of salts and wastes of urea and uric acid. And the function of the eccrine sweat glands is all about regulating body temperature and maintaining water and ion balance in the body. And these eccrine sweat glands, they are active shortly after birth, so little babies can, they may have a more difficult time regulating body temperature because their eccrine glands are not always active immediately. But, in a reasonable time after birth, within the first month or so, then the eccrine sweat glands get to work doing their job of cooling the body. Apocrine sweat glands, on the other hand, are they do not become activated until puberty, and that's when they really turn on. And they are found mostly in their duct opens into a hair follicle, and they're found mostly at the armpits, in the groin, and around the nipples. That's where we find the apocrine sweat glands. And despite their name, they are also a merocrine gland, releasing their secretion by exocytosis. So it's weird that we name them apocrine sweat glands, but they secrete via merocrine secretion. So as I said, their secretion, they begin secreting at puberty. So this is the gland that turns turns our delightful little 9-year-olds into stinky little preteens. And the secretion itself is odorless, but it has in it lots of fats and proteins and sugars. And as skin bacteria begin to digest the fats and proteins and sugars that are in this sweat secretion, then they produce it's the bacteria that produces the smell molecules that give sweat that musky, strong smell that we associate with it. It's not known whether there is any function to this for humans, but in other mammals, so in close relatives of ours, the apocrine sweat glands have the function of alerting the other animals of that same species to the sexual, where in the sexual cycle that animal might be. So like if it's a female, whether it is preparing to produce eggs and maybe it's a good time to mate or not. So it's likely that there is some sort of pheromone that is produced there that may have some activity on others of the human species. Other glands that are so closely associated in structure with the sweat glands are the ceruminous and the mammary glands. Ceruminous glands they're just modified sweat glands, and we talked about how the apocrine sweat glands produce an oil or a fatty material. Well, ceruminous glands produce a secretion that is primarily a fat. They produce earwax. It helps to seal the skin there in the ear canal, and because it's waxy, it's waterproof. It prevents a lot of fluids from hanging out in the external ear region, which could lead to infections if fluids were hanging out there a lot. And so it also helps to keep the eardrum pliable. It kind of moisturizes the eardrum and can act as a barrier to foreign particles from getting in. And depending on genetics, some people produce very dry, flaky earwax. Others produce a really wet, kind of oily earwax. So just depending on the person, the consistency of the earwax that's produced can be different. Mammary glands are also a modified sweat gland. Remember those apocrine sweat glands and what the materials were that were in that sweat? Well, it's the same types of materials that are found in the secretions of mammary glands. It's rich in fats and proteins and carbohydrates. So, we talk about milk fat and milk sugars and the milk proteins. So there's a close analogy here between the mammary glands and the kinds of secretions that are produced by the apocrine sweat glands. And of course, the milk that females can produce following childbirth, it is all about providing nutrients for the developing baby infant. Okay, so there we have it. The primary accessory organs that are associated with the skin. And there are some, we will talk as we get into the nervous system. We'll talk about the sensory receptors there. So we're not going to worry about those in this chapter. So there you have it. We looked at the nails, finger and toenails. We looked at hair, and then we looked at the different kinds of sweat glands and modified sweat glands that we find in the body. Questions? You know how to reach me.